The atmospheric recycler on Verith 4 had been flagged for inspection twice in 6 months. Both times, the maintenance ticket went into the Keith Ronnie Administrative Grid Service queue, and both times, the queue returned a response window of 40 to 60 standard days. Both times, Station Director Oreth Kell signed the deferral form, noted the recycler's operating margins were still within tolerance, and filed the ticket as non-critical. I co-signed the second deferral. I was the junior comms officer. My job was to file the forms, log the confirmations, and make sure the outpost's relay equipment stayed calibrated to the grid's administrative frequencies. I had been on Verith 4 for 11 months. In that time, I had filed 614 routine logs, 9 maintenance requests, 2 personnel transfer forms, and 0 distress hails. The recycler failed on the morning of my 615th routine log. Verith 4 was a Keith Ronnie atmospheric monitoring station on the inner moon of the gas giant Sareth, in the administrative district of the Keith Ronnie 7th sector. 6 crew. The station's purpose was to maintain a network of atmospheric sensors across Verith's thin methane nitrogen envelope and relay the data to the 7th sector's Environmental Survey Office on Keithran Prime. It was not a military installation. It was not a research facility. It was, by the grid's own classification, a Category 3 monitoring outpost, the lowest tier that still warranted permanent staffing. The 6 of us lived in a sealed habitat module bolted to Verith's basalt ridge at an altitude of 1,100 meters. Outside, the atmosphere was a corrosive slurry of methane, ammonia derivatives, and hydrogen sulfide at concentrations that would dissolve exposed tissue in minutes. Inside, the recycler maintained a breathable nitrogen-oxygen envelope, scrubbed the carbon dioxide, and neutralized any trace compounds that seeped through the habitat's aging seals. The recycler was a Keith Ronnie Model 9 industrial unit designed for stations twice our size. It was 22 years old. It had been serviced 4 times since installation. The manufacturer's recommended service interval was once every 18 months. I note these figures because they are in my incident report and because they matter. My days on Verith 4 followed a pattern that I had long since stopped noticing. I woke at 03:30 station time. I ate a ration pack in the common room, usually grain paste with mineral supplement, while reading the overnight sensor digest that the atmospheric array had compiled during the dark hours. I walked to the comms bay, which was 11 paces from the common room door, and sat in the same chair I had sat in for 11 months, and opened the relay console and began the morning calibration sequence. The calibration took 40 minutes. It was the same 40 minutes every morning. I adjusted the relay antenna's bearing to compensate for Verith's orbital drift, verified the signal path to Keithran Prime's administrative receiver, ran a diagnostic on the comms bay's power supply, and filed the overnight log. Log 615 would have read like logs 1 through 614. Atmospheric sensor data nominal, relay calibration nominal, no incoming traffic, no outgoing traffic, station status unchanged. I never filed log 615. The failure began at 04:11. I was in the comms bay 13 minutes into the calibration. The first indication was a pressure alarm, a sharp, descending 3-tone sequence I had heard only during quarterly drills. I looked at the environmental panel on the comms bay wall. The recycler's primary intake seal was showing a pressure differential that should not have existed. I opened the station intercom to the maintenance corridor. Pren, intake seal is flagging, pressure differential at 0.7 above baseline. Environmental technician Pren Asith did not answer for 9 seconds. When she did, her voice was flat and quick. I see it. I'm going to the recycler bay. I logged the alarm at 04:11 and continued watching the environmental panel. The pressure differential climbed. 0.8, 0.9. I had never seen it above 0.3 outside of a drill scenario. The training documentation said point 9 indicated a potential seal compromise requiring immediate inspection. The word potential lost its meaning as I watched the number climb past 1.0. Then a second alarm joined the first. This one, a steady tone, indicating trace compound detection in the habitat atmosphere. Hydrogen sulfide. The recycler's scrubber stage was leaking byproduct back into the sealed envelope instead of venting it to the exterior. At 04:14, the recycler's primary intake seal failed. The sound was not dramatic. It was a low, wet hiss, the kind of sound a pressure vessel makes when a gasket gives way and compressed fluid finds the path of least resistance. I heard it through the comms bay wall from the direction of the maintenance corridor. Then I heard Pren's voice on the intercom, no longer flat. She was calling for Director Kell. She was also coughing. I pulled up the environmental readout on the comms console. Hydrogen sulfide concentration in the maintenance corridor had jumped from trace levels to 40 parts per million in under a minute. Breathable threshold for Keith Ronnie physiology is 12 parts per million. Irritant threshold is 20. Tissue damage threshold is 60. The corridor was at 40 and climbing. Director Kell reached the maintenance corridor before I did. He sealed the recycler bay door manually. I heard the heavy clang of the manual bolts engaging through two walls, trapping the worst of the leak in the bay itself. But the corridor was already contaminated. Pren had been in the corridor when the seal failed. She had chemical burns on her forearms and the left side of her face where the hydrogen sulfide-laden air had contacted her skin membranes. Sensor technician Dorev Khan had been in the corridor behind her, heading to the lavatory. He had burns on his hands and was coughing in a way that suggested his respiratory membranes were irritated beyond the surface level. We moved them both to the medical bay. Medic Toreth L. treated the burns with neutralizing gel and sealed Pren's face wound with a dermal patch. She worked without speaking. Toreth was the quietest person on the station, and in 11 months I had never heard her voice rise above the conversational register she maintained even during drill scenarios. The coughing would not stop for Dorev. Toreth put him on supplemental oxygen from the emergency reserves and told him to breathe slowly and count his inhalations. Director Kell called a station-wide meeting in the common room at 04:31. All 6 of us, including Pren with her face patched and Dorev with the oxygen canister held to his mouth. Director Kell was calm. He laid out the situation in the same flat, administrative tone he used for shift briefings. The primary recycler was offline. The intake seal had failed catastrophically, full gasket rupture, not a partial leak. The recycler bay was sealed, but hydrogen sulfide was present in the maintenance corridor at concentrations that made it uninhabitable without respiratory protection, and we had 4 sets of respiratory gear rated for short-duration exposure only. The secondary recycler, a smaller unit designed to handle atmospheric loads during maintenance shutdowns of the primary, had activated automatically. It was rated for 40% of the primary's scrubbing capacity. 40% is not enough, Director Kell said. At 40% scrubbing, our carbon dioxide will exceed safe concentrations in approximately 9 hours. The hydrogen sulfide from the corridor leak will continue to migrate through the habitat seals at a rate that depends on how well we can isolate the corridor. Best case, trace compounds reach irritant levels in the common areas in 6 to 7 hours. Worst case, 4. He paused. He looked at each of us in turn, Pren with her burns, Dorev with his coughing, Lorith Moss the sensor technician who had been asleep when the alarm sounded and still had the flattened expression of someone pulled from deep rest, Toreth the medic, and me. The youngest, the newest, the one whose job was to file forms. "Sealith," he said, "file a distress hail." I went to the comms bay. Filing a distress hail on the Keith Ronnie administrative grid is a procedural task. There is a form. The form has 31 fields. I had been trained on this form during my first week at the station. I had filed it once in a drill and never in reality. My hands were steady as I filled in the fields. I note this because I expected them not to be. I filled in the station identifier Verth 4, Keith Ronnie 7th Sector, registration number KV70441. The nature of the emergency, atmospheric recycler failure, Category 2 environmental hazard. The number of personnel 6. The number of injured 2 non-critical, the atmospheric telemetry, current concentrations, projected degradation curves, secondary recycler capacity, estimated time to critical thresholds. And the type of assistance requested atmospheric systems technician, replacement recycler seals, evacuation transport if repair not feasible within safe window. I transmitted the hail at 0438 on the grid's emergency maintenance frequency. It went where I aimed it, to the 7th sector's nearest registered emergency maintenance node, a relay platform in stationary orbit above Keithran Prime. The confirmation came back at 0441, 3 minutes. The grid was efficient. The grid was always efficient. The confirmation said, acknowledged, nearest available maintenance vessel, KAV Sethran Reach, currently at orbital dock 7 above Keithran Prime. Estimated transit time to Verth 4, 11 hours 14 minutes, vessel dispatched, stand by. I read the number twice, 11 hours 14 minutes. I opened my atmospheric projection model and ran it again, using the current hydrogen sulfide migration rate through the interior seals and the secondary recyclers measured output over the last 17 minutes. The model was simple arithmetic, concentrations, volumes, flow rates, thresholds. It did not require interpretation. The model returned a time to critical of 4 hours and 32 minutes. At that point, hydrogen sulfide concentrations in the common areas, including the medical bay where Pren and Dorev were being treated, would exceed tissue damage threshold. Carbon dioxide would exceed safe breathing limits approximately 2 hours after that. I brought the projection to Director Kell. He read it. He set the datapad down on the common room table and placed both hands flat beside it. 11 hours, he said. 11 hours, 14 minutes, I said. We reach critical in 4.5. He was quiet for 8 seconds. I counted them against the recycler's absent hum, the silence where the bass note should have been. Then he gave orders. Begin emergency atmospheric mitigation. Seal the maintenance corridor at both ends. Move all personnel to the common room and medical bay. Shut down all non-essential systems to reduce carbon dioxide output. Vent the maintenance corridor to exterior atmosphere if the emergency relief valves could be operated remotely. They could. The relief valves in the maintenance corridor were designed for exactly this scenario, dumping contaminated atmosphere to the exterior. The problem was that venting the corridor also meant losing a portion of our breathable air volume. The habitat was a closed system. Every liter we vented to Verth's toxic exterior was a liter we could not replace until the recycler was repaired. We did it anyway. I opened the relief valves remotely from the comms bay at 0452 and watched the corridor pressure drop as the contaminated atmosphere bled out through the hull. The hydrogen sulfide readings in the common area stabilized, then began to decline slowly. The carbon dioxide readings continued to climb, but at a reduced rate. Director Kell recalculated. With the corridor vented and the secondary recycler running at full capacity, our new time to critical was approximately 5 hours, maybe 5.5, if we kept all non-essential systems offline and restricted physical activity to reduce metabolic carbon dioxide output. 5 hours was not 11 hours. It was not close. I went back to the comms bay and filed an updated telemetry packet to the grid, appending the revised atmospheric projections. The grid acknowledged at 0503. No change to the ETA. The KAV Sethran Reach was already en route at maximum transit speed. 11 hours was the best they could do. I sat in the comms bay and stared at the acknowledgement on my console. The numbers were not complicated. We had 5 hours. Help was 11 hours away. The difference was 6 hours. 6 hours is not a margin that ingenuity closes. 6 hours is not a margin that heroics overcome. It is a margin that kills quietly while the system functions correctly. I ran the atmospheric model one more time, adjusting for the most optimistic assumptions I could justify: lower metabolic rates, tighter seal performance on the interior partitions, higher scrubber efficiency from the secondary recycler. The most optimistic projection returned a time to critical of 5 hours and 41 minutes. I did not file this projection to the grid because the optimistic assumptions required conditions I could not guarantee. I sat with the number for 2 minutes, 5 hours and 41 minutes. Best case. The grid's vessel was 11 hours and 14 minutes away. Even at my most optimistic, the gap was 5 hours and 33 minutes. 5 hours and 33 minutes during which the 6 of us would breathe air that was becoming less breathable with each exhalation. I opened the comms console's contact directory. It contained every frequency in the Keith-Ronnie Administrative Grid's 7th Sector allocation: maintenance nodes, survey offices, patrol relay points, civilian transit authorities. I scrolled through them. None were closer than Keithran Prime. The 7th Sector's emergency infrastructure was centralized. It was efficient. It was designed for a region where the nearest asset was always within a few hours of any registered station. Verith was at the edge of the 7th Sector. The grid's coverage maps showed our position as a small marker at the boundary of the administrative district, far from the cluster of relay platforms and maintenance depots that orbited Keithran Prime. We were not an afterthought. Category 3 stations are provisioned according to the same standards as any other, but we were far away. Distance is not a design flaw. It is a fact. I closed the directory. There was no one else to hail. The grid had received my request, dispatched its nearest asset, and confirmed the timeline. The system had done everything it was built to do. The system was functioning correctly. Director Kell appeared in the comms bay doorway. He had brought 2 emergency ration packs and a water flask. He set one ration pack on my console and leaned against the doorframe. "Have you eaten?" he said. "No." "Eat. Keep your energy stable. We are going to be sitting still for the next several hours, and low blood sugar does not improve judgment." I opened the ration pack. Grain paste with mineral supplement. The same thing I ate every morning. The routine of it, the familiar texture, the metallic tang of the mineral compound, was steadying in a way I did not expect. Director Kell ate his standing in the doorway methodically, without apparent pleasure or displeasure. "Director," I said, "the model's best case gives us 5 hours and 41 minutes. "I know," he said. "I ran the same model. The grid's vessel is 11 hours out." "I know that as well." He finished his ration pack, folded the wrapper along its original creases, and put it in his pocket. "We will seal the common room and medical bay as a single breathable compartment. We will shut down the comms bay ventilation and rely on the air volume in the common room and medical bay only, supplemented by the emergency oxygen canisters. We will reduce our metabolic output to the minimum. We will not discuss the numbers with Pren or Dorev. They have enough to manage." He looked at me. "Continue monitoring. If anything changes in either direction, I want to know immediately." He left. I sat in the comms bay, alone, eating grain paste, watching numbers climb on the environmental panel. The secondary recycler's hum was thinner and higher pitched than the primary's bass note, a sound I associated with quarterly drills and maintenance shutdowns, not with normal life. It was the sound of something trying and not quite succeeding. At 0506, the CO2 reading in the common areas crossed 3%. I noted it in the log. Keith-Ronnie safe limit is 2.5%. We had been above safe limits for 16 minutes. The effects were subtle but present, a faint heaviness behind my eyes, a sense that my thoughts required slightly more effort than usual to complete. Nothing debilitating, nothing dramatic, just the quiet arithmetic of an atmosphere that was no longer quite enough. At 0509, my console received an incoming signal. The frequency was wrong. I do not mean it was distorted or poorly tuned. I mean it was a frequency that was not in my console's recognition library. The Keith-Roney administrative grid operates on a designated band of frequencies allocated by the 7th Sector's Communications Authority. My console was calibrated to receive on those frequencies and on the Universal Emergency Compression Band. The incoming signal was on neither. It was clean, strong, well modulated. Whoever had sent it knew how to operate a communications array, and it was addressing Verth 4 by our registration number. I stared at the identifier tag embedded in the signal header. KV70441, that was us. But the transmitting identifier was a string I had never seen. It did not follow Keith-Roney naming conventions. It did not follow coalition conventions, or Vethani conventions, or any of the 12 species-specific identifier formats I had studied during my comms officer certification program. The signal carried a voice channel. I opened it. Verth 4, this is ECV Ren's Landing, Earth Terran Patrol Service. We have received your atmospheric telemetry. We are 47 minutes from your position at current heading. Requesting updated atmospheric composition, habitat volume, and a manifest of chemical compounds present. Over. The voice spoke in Keith-Roney. Accented, heavily accented, the consonants softened and the tonal markers slightly flat but comprehensible. Whoever was speaking had learned my language from a database rather than from a Keith-Roney speaker. The grammar was correct. The pronunciation was not. I did not respond for 6 seconds. I was checking my transmission log. The distress hail I had filed at 0438 was addressed to the Keith-Roney Grid's emergency maintenance node. I had aimed it precisely. The log confirmed. Transmission on grid frequency Keith-Roney 7 emergency maintenance, directed to relay platform Keithran Prime Node 12. No secondary addressing. No broadcast. No spillover band. I had not hailed this frequency. I had not hailed anything called the Earth Terran Patrol Service. I had not hailed anyone called Ren's Landing. I did not know what a Ren was. I keyed the transmit channel. ECV Ren's Landing, this is Verth 4, Junior Comms Officer Seelith Vaughn. I confirm receipt of your signal. How did you receive our telemetry? Our hail was filed to the Keith-Roney administrative grid. Over. The pause was 4 seconds, then, Verth 4 understood. We can discuss routing after we get your air sorted. 47 minutes. Transmitting updated atmospheric request now. Ren's Landing out. The request arrived on my console 3 seconds later. A compact data query formatted in a standard interspecies technical protocol I recognized from my training, but had never used operationally. It asked for 6 data points: current hydrogen sulfide concentration in all habitable compartments, current carbon dioxide concentration, habitat pressurized volume in cubic meters, number of personnel, the chemical formula of the scrubber medium in our secondary recycler, and the rated flow capacity of our emergency relief valves. The query was precise. Whoever had drafted it knew exactly what information was needed to assess our atmospheric situation remotely. It was not a general inquiry. It was the work of someone who had already read our original telemetry and was asking for the specific missing variables needed to complete their own calculation. I brought the signal log to Director Kell. He read it standing up in the common room, one hand braced against the wall. His breathing was slightly labored. The CO2 was climbing, and we could all feel it. A mild thickness in the air, a faint resistance at the top of each inhalation that made you breathe a fraction deeper to compensate. Earth, he said. I do not know the species designation, I said. The identifier reads Earth Terran Patrol Service. The vessel is ECV Ren's Landing. I cannot match the format to any entry in my recognition tables. I know the species designation, Director Kell said. Earth, humans. They are in the 7th Sector Registry as a minor spacefaring polity with limited patrol assets in adjacent sectors. They are not members of the Keithrani administrative grid. They do not hold observer status. They are not party to any maintenance or mutual aid agreement with the Keithrani 7th Sector. He paused. He was not reading from a database. He was reciting from memory, the kind of general knowledge a station director was expected to carry. You did not hail them. No, Director. Then how did they receive our telemetry? They did not say. They said they would discuss routing after I checked the phrasing in my memory, got our air sorted. Director Kell looked at the environmental readout on the common room wall panel. The CO2 was at 3.2%. Keithrani safe limit is 2.5%. We had passed the safe limit 20 minutes ago. The hydrogen sulfide in the common areas was at 9 parts per million, below irritant threshold, but climbing again as the vented corridor's residual compounds migrated slowly through the interior seals. 47 minutes, he said. 47 minutes. They requested updated atmospheric data. He was quiet for 3 seconds, then he nodded once. Send it. I went back to the comms bay and compiled the 6 data points. I transmitted them on the same frequency the signal had arrived on, a frequency I had to manually enter into my console's dial register, because it was not in any preset bank. The acknowledgement came back in 11 seconds. Verith 4, data received. We carry atmospheric sealant compound rated for hydrogen sulfide neutralization at concentrations up to 300 parts per million. Our environmental technician has serviced Keithrani Model 9 recyclers on 2 prior occasions. Please confirm your recycler is a Model 9. Wren's landing out. I confirmed. I sat in my chair and looked at the console. A ship I had never heard of, from a species I could not place in my recognition tables, crewed by people who had serviced our exact recycler model on 2 prior occasions, was 47 minutes away and closing. The KAV Sethran Reach was 10 hours and 53 minutes away. I did not file an updated log to the grid regarding the Wren's landing signal. There was nothing in the form's 31 fields for this. Field 12 asks for the source of any incoming assistance. The options are a grid-dispatched vessel, B, sector patrol, C, civilian transit vessel responding to emergency band, D, other. I did not know which box to check for a ship from a species that was not in my recognition tables, answering a hail that was not aimed at them, on a frequency I had never transmitted on. I told Director Kell about the Model 9 confirmation. He received it without expression. Lorith, who had been sitting on the common room floor with her knees drawn up, looked at me. They've repaired our model before, she said. Apparently. How? I do not know, I did not ask. They said 2 prior occasions. Lorith looked at the wall. 2 prior occasions, she repeated, as if the number itself was something she needed to hold and turn over. Then she went back to looking at the wall. Director Kell had moved Pren and Dorev to the comms bay by then. It had the tightest interior seals and the smallest air volume, which meant the secondary recycler's limited output could maintain slightly better conditions in that compartment. Pren was sleeping again, her breathing shallow but steady. Dorev was awake, sitting upright against the console bulkhead with the oxygen canister in his lap, taking measured sips from the mask. His coughing had subsided to an intermittent rasp, every 3 or 4 minutes. But the sound was wet now, deeper, and Toreth's expression, when she listened to it, had the careful neutrality of someone assessing something she did not want to say aloud. The next 47 minutes were the longest of my career. I know this is a common expression. I mean it literally and specifically. I watched the environmental panel. I watched the CO2 climb 3.4%, 3.6, 3.8. Each 0.1% was a number I could calculate the meaning of. A slight increase in breathing rate, a mild headache onset, a narrowing of peripheral cognitive function. I watched the hydrogen sulfide creep upward in the common areas, 10 parts per million, 11, still below irritant threshold, not comfortably below. I watched Pren sleep in the medical bay through the intercom camera. The dermal patch on her face had sealed cleanly. Her breathing was even. Dorev's coughing had subsided to a periodic rasp, once every 2 or 3 minutes, a dry, scraping sound that echoed in the medical bay's sealed quiet. Toreth sat beside him, monitoring his oxygen canister's pressure gauge. Director Kell was in the common room, sitting in a chair he had pulled to the center of the room, away from the walls, away from the environmental panel. He was not watching the numbers. He had calculated them already. He knew what they said. He was sitting with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the floor, and I realized, watching him through the intercom, that he was conserving oxygen, sitting still, breathing slowly, reducing his metabolic rate by conscious effort. Loreth Moss was in the comms bay with me, sitting on the floor against the far wall. She had not spoken since Director Kell's briefing. She was awake. She was looking at the ceiling. At 0548 the signal came again. Verith 4, Wren's Landing. We are on approach. Visual on your habitat module. Requesting docking clearance at your exterior maintenance port. We are reading your exterior atmosphere as yes. That is a lot of hydrogen sulfide. Our crew will be in full environmental suits. Wren's landing out. I cleared the docking port's approach corridor. A console command I had performed during drills, but never for a real vessel, and watched on the external sensor feed as a ship I had never seen before slid into frame against the dark curve of Verith's surface. It was small, smaller than I had expected, though I had no rational basis for any expectation. Smaller than the KAV Sethran Reach would have been. The Sethran Reach was a dedicated maintenance cruiser with a crew of 40 and a full atmospheric systems workshop in its hold. The Wren's Landing was a patrol frigate. I could see that from the hull geometry, a narrow, angular profile designed for speed and sensor coverage, not for cargo or workshop space. Its hull was pale gray, weathered in a way that spoke of sustained service rather than neglect. There was visible scoring along the port nacelle, micrometeorite impacts perhaps, or the abrasion of repeated atmospheric transits. A patch of mismatched plating near the aft sensor array marked where a repair had been made with whatever material was available rather than the original specification. It was not a maintenance vessel. It was not equipped for this. It had come anyway. It docked at our exterior maintenance port at 0556. The port had not been used in 7 months. The docking seal took 3 attempts to pressurize. The port's gasket was as old as the recyclers, and the cold of Verith's exterior had contracted the rubber compound. On the 3rd attempt, the seal held. The airlock cycled. 3 figures in full environmental suits entered the maintenance corridor, the one I had vented to exterior an hour earlier. They moved quickly, without hesitation, without the tentative steps of people entering an unfamiliar space. The first figure carried a portable atmospheric analyzer the size of a Keithrani datapad. The second carried 2 heavy cases slung from shoulder straps, one on each side, balanced. The third carried what I later learned was a field-deployable hydrogen sulfide neutralizer, a compact unit that could scrub a sealed compartment of 600 cubic meters in under 20 minutes. I watched them on the internal security feed from the comms bay. Loreth had stood up from the floor and was watching beside me. Neither of us spoke. The 3 figures went directly to the recycler bay door. The first one, the one with the analyzer, held the device up to the door seal and read the display. The second one checked the manual bolts that Director Kell had engaged 3 hours earlier. The third set the neutralizer down in the corridor, activated it, and stepped back. I heard the neutralizer begin to work through the comms bay wall, a steady, low whir like a smaller version of the recycler's scrubber stage. On the environmental panel, the hydrogen sulfide readings in the maintenance corridor began to drop. Not slowly, the way they had been declining since I vented the corridor. Rapidly. 28 parts per million. 22. 15. The first figure unbolted the recycler bay door and opened it. The three of them entered. The recycler bay's internal camera had been offline for 4 months, another deferred maintenance item on the long list of deferred maintenance items that I had co-signed. I could not see them inside the bay, but they had patched into our internal comms system, cleanly, without asking, using a protocol bridge that interfaced with our intercom channel, and I could hear them. Bay reads 190 ppm hydrogen sulfide, high but manageable in suits. Intake seal, there it is, full gasket rupture, housing scored on the interior face. See that groove? That's where the gasket's seated. It's been leaking micro amounts for months before it went. Pren, sorry, I'm reading the tech's name off the maintenance log. She flagged this twice. A second voice, deeper. Gaskets shredded. The housing scoring is maybe 2 millimeters deep. We can fill the scoring with sealant compound and lay a new gasket over it. Did we bring Model 9 gaskets? The first voice. We brought the general atmospheric kit. Let me check. Yeah, we have a gasket rated for a Model 11, but the bore diameter is identical. The pressure rating is higher than the 9 requires, which means it'll seat tighter than the original spec. It'll hold. The second voice, good enough, let me prep the housing. The third voice, quieter than the other two, from the corridor. Neutralizers clearing the corridor. Common areas should be breathable within 20 minutes. I'm going to move to the interior seals and check for secondary contamination. I listened. They spoke to each other the way Pren and Dorev spoke during routine sensor maintenance, short phrases, no wasted words, each person stating what they saw and what they were doing, the responses confirming or adjusting without argument. They were not performing urgency. They were not narrating their heroism. They were technicians working a repair under bad atmospheric conditions, and the fact that the atmosphere in question was not theirs, in a station that was not theirs, on a moon that was not in their sector, did not appear to change the cadence of their work at all. I heard the sealant compound being applied to the housing, a brief hiss of pressurized application, then the first voice calling out, seated. Give it 40 seconds to cure. While we wait, Model 11 gasket coming out of the kit. A rustling sound. A metallic click. Bores clean, gaskets clean. We'll seat it as soon as the compound sets. Loreth was still sitting beside me. She was watching the environmental panel. She said, without looking away from it, they work fast. Yes, I said. 47 minutes from a signal station in the next sector, and they had the right tools. They had a general atmospheric kit. They said the gasket is from a different model. But it fits. They said it fits. Loreth looked at the panel for 3 more seconds. The hydrogen sulfide was at 10 parts per million and falling. Good, she said. She did not say anything else. Within 14 minutes of boarding, they had the neutralizer running in the corridor and the recycler bay open for repair. I watched the environmental readings on my console. The common area hydrogen sulfide concentration, which had been climbing toward irritant threshold for 3 hours, stopped climbing, held, then began to drop, 12 parts per million, 11, 10, 9. At 06:23, the CO2 in the common areas was still at 4.1%, well above safe limits, and the effects were no longer subtle. My headache had settled into a dull, steady pressure behind my eyes. My thoughts were slightly slower than they should have been. Director Kell's deliberate stillness in the common room had spread to all of us. We were all breathing carefully, conserving, waiting. Dorev's coughing had worsened again. Toreth was on the second oxygen canister. The intercom crackled. Verith 4, Wren's landing crew. We've replaced the intake gasket and patched the housing scoring with sealant compound. Going to restart the primary recycler now. Expect a 90-second startup cycle. Your scrubber medium is still loaded and viable, it's just the seal that went. Once the recycler's online, your CO2 should start dropping within 10 minutes. Stand by. I heard the recycler's startup sequence through the wall. A low hum, the initial power draw, then a rising whine as the compressor spun up, then the steady, thrumming bass note that had been the background sound of my entire 11 months on Verith 4. The sound I had stopped hearing because it was always there. The sound whose absence I had been sitting in for 3 hours and 46 minutes. The environmental panel updated. CO2 began to drop. Slowly at first, the primary recycler was running through its warm-up curve, gradually increasing scrubbing throughput, then faster as it reached operating capacity. 4%, 3.8, 3.5. The hydrogen sulfide readings in every compartment continued to fall as the neutralizer in the corridor worked in tandem with the recycler's restored scrubber stage. By 0640, the common areas were back within breathable parameters. I took a full breath for the first time in 2 hours and felt the headache begin to ease. By 0700, the maintenance corridor was below irritant threshold. By 0715, Director Kell opened the comms bay door and stood in the corridor and breathed. He did not say anything. He stood there for 11 seconds with his eyes closed, breathing. The 3 figures from the Wren's landing emerged from the recycler bay at 0722. They had removed their environmental suit helmets. I saw their faces for the first time. They were not Keith Ronnie. Their skin was a uniform tone, pale, faintly flushed from the exertion of working in environmental suits for over an hour. Their features were bilaterally symmetrical in a way that looked almost geometric. 2 eyes, front-facing, set beneath a ridge of bone that cast slight shadow over the orbital sockets. Flat faces without the mottled gray-green pigmentation of Keith Ronnie complexion. Mouths that seemed small by Keith Ronnie proportion. And hair, actual keratinous filaments growing from the tops of their heads, which I found briefly disorienting. One had dark hair cut short. One had lighter hair pulled back from the face. The third, the quietest one, had hair of an intermediate shade tucked beneath a cloth band. The tallest one, the one who had carried the 2 heavy cases, extended a hand toward Director Kell, palm up, fingers spread. I did not recognize the gesture. Director Kell did. He placed his hand over the humans briefly and withdrew it. Captain Wren Foss, the tall one said, ECV Wren's landing. Your recycler is online. The gasket is a temporary fit. It's the right bore diameter but the wrong model designation, so your grid maintenance registry will flag it as non-standard. It will hold for at least 200 hours, probably longer. Your scrubber medium is at 60% capacity, enough for weeks, but flag it for replacement at the next service interval. Director Kell nodded. Our grid maintenance vessel is approximately, he checked the time on the common room display, 7 hours out. Good. They can install the correct gasket and resupply the scrubber. We also treated your 2 injured crew. Captain Foss gestured to the second figure, the one with the deeper voice and the dark hair. Technician Albara is our environmental systems rating, but he has field medical certification. The chemical burns on your technician's forearms and face are neutralized and dressed. The dermal patches your medic applied were correct for hydrogen sulfide exposure. The one with the respiratory irritation, Dorev, we administered a bronchodilator analog from our interspecies medical kit. It should ease the coughing and reduce the membrane inflammation, but I would not consider it a definitive treatment. He needs a Keith Ronnie physician who can assess the extent of the respiratory damage. Director Kell said, understood. There was a pause. The third figure, the quiet one, the one who had deployed the neutralizer and checked the interior seals, was repacking the equipment into the cases. She worked without looking up, folding cables and sealing latches with the automatic precision of someone who had packed and unpacked this kit many times. I said, Captain Foss, how did you receive our distress hail? He looked at me. His front-facing eyes were a color I could not immediately name, somewhere between amber and the gray-brown of Verith's basalt. He regarded me for 3 seconds without speaking. Your hail was intercepted by Earth Signal Station Fairfield 11, he said. Fairfield 11 is a small relay and signals intelligence installation in the adjacent sector. It monitors a range of administrative frequencies in this region as part of a passive traffic cataloging program. Your hail came through on a frequency that Fairfield 11's antenna array routinely monitors. I filed the hail to the Keith Ronnie administrative grid, I said, not to your station. Correct. Your hail was addressed to the Keith Ronnie grid's emergency maintenance node. Fairfield 11 intercepted it passively, the way a receiver picks up any signal on a frequency it is calibrated to listen to. Standard protocol for a non-Earth addressed intercept is to log the signal metadata, tag it by source and frequency, and file it in the weekly traffic report. The relay officer on duty is not authorized to read the content of intercepted communications. She is not authorized to act on them. She is definitely not authorized to respond. But she responded, I said. She responded, Captain Foss said. His tone did not change. Petty Officer Marin Cade, the relay officer on duty at Fairfield 11, read the embedded atmospheric telemetry in your hail. She calculated your time to critical and compared it to the response ETA your grid confirmed. She told me afterward that the arithmetic took her about 40 seconds. Your numbers did not work. She contacted me. The Wren's landing was docked at Fairfield 11 for a scheduled sensor calibration, and asked if I could reach your position in under 5 hours. I told her 47 minutes at best speed. He said this in the same flat, accented Keith Ronnie he had used throughout. No emphasis on any word. No change in tone. He could have been reading a maintenance report. She asked if you could make it, I repeated. She asked. I said yes. We departed Fairfield 11 at 05:06 your station time. The atmospheric data request I sent you at 05:09 was drafted by Petty Officer Cade before we left the station. She compiled the query, identified the 6 data points she needed to confirm her calculation, and transmitted it to me for relay to you while we were already underway. I looked at the console behind me. The distress hail I had filed at 04:38, 28 minutes before the Wren's landing signal arrived, had been aimed at the Keith Ronnie grid. It had reached the grid. The grid had confirmed receipt and dispatched the KAV Sethron reach. Everything had worked as designed. The system had functioned correctly. The nearest Keith Ronnie maintenance vessel was 11 hours away, and the system had told me so, and the system had dispatched it, and the system was correct. And in the 28 minutes between my hail and the Wren's landing signal, a single relay officer at a signals intelligence station in an adjacent sector had intercepted my hail on a frequency she routinely monitored, read the content she was not authorized to read, done the arithmetic she was not authorized to do, and dispatched a ship she was not authorized to dispatch. Captain Foss, I said, will Petty Officer Cade face disciplinary consequences? He looked at me for 4 seconds. Petty Officer Cade's relay log for this event is 3 lines long. She will file it as a standard protocol emergency intervention under the Terran Patrol Service's Standing Humanitarian Response Order, which authorizes patrol assets to respond to life-threatening emergencies regardless of the signal's intended recipient. Is that order intended to cover this situation? He paused. The standing order exists, whether it authorizes a relay officer at a signals intelligence station to independently dispatch a patrol frigate that is docked at her station for an unrelated purpose. That is a question her commanding officer will evaluate. Another pause. Her commanding officer is 3 sectors away and will not see her relay log for approximately 4 days. What will happen in 4 days? Captain Foss picked up one of the equipment cases from the floor. In 4 days, her commanding officer will read a 3-line relay log that describes a standard protocol emergency intervention resulting in 6 lives preserved. The commanding officer will then decide whether to file a commendation or a reprimand. He turned toward the airlock. In my experience, The outcome depends on the commanding officer. The third crew member, the quiet one who had deployed the neutralizer and had been repacking this entire time, straightened up with both cases in hand. As she passed me on her way to the airlock, she said, without turning her head, "The gasket we installed has a serial number stamped on the interior rim. Terran manufacture, Model 11 rated. When your maintenance crew replaces it, they will see it does not match your station's parts registry. You can tell them it fit." She followed Captain Foss through the airlock. The second crew member, Technician Albara, paused at the airlock threshold and looked back at Dorev, who was sitting in the medical bay doorway, no longer coughing, breathing slowly through the bronchodilator's residual effect. Albara nodded once. Then he stepped through. The airlock cycled. The docking seal disengaged with a soft thud. The Wren's landing undocked from Verith 4 at 0741. I watched it pull away on the external sensor feed, the narrow gray hull swinging clear of the docking port, the maneuvering thrusters firing in brief, precise bursts, the scoring on the port nacelle catching the faint light of Sareth's reflected glow as the ship banked. It accelerated away against the dark methane haze of Verith's atmosphere. Within 6 minutes it was a sensor return. Within 10, it was gone. The comms bay was quiet. The recycler hummed. Pren stirred in the chair where she had been sleeping and opened her eyes and looked at me. "Who was here?" she said. "3 people from a patrol frigate," I said. "They repaired the recycler." "Keithrani patrol?" "No." She looked at the environmental panel. The numbers were all green within safe parameters, every compartment. She looked at the dermal patch on her forearm where the burn had been dressed. She looked at me again. "Whose patrol?" she said. "Earth," I said. "A species called humans. They were docked at a signal station in the adjacent sector." Pren was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, "I did not know there was a signal station in the adjacent sector." "Neither did I." She closed her eyes and went back to sleep. The bronchodilator that Technician Albara had administered to Dorev was taking full effect. His coughing had stopped entirely, and he was breathing slowly and evenly through the oxygen mask, his hands still in his lap, the burns on his fingers covered with a secondary dressing the human technician had applied over Toreth's original treatment. Director Kell was in the common room, writing. He had pulled the shift log to his personal console and was composing his preliminary incident notes, the informal summary that would precede my formal report. I could hear him through the open comms bay door, the quiet tapping of his input stylus against the console surface. I filed an updated status report to the grid at 08:15. I reported that the atmospheric emergency had been resolved by an external response from a non-grid vessel, ECV Wren's landing, Earth Terran Patrol Service. I attached the atmospheric telemetry showing the restoration of breathable conditions. I noted that the primary recycler was online with a temporary gasket, and that the original maintenance request for a permanent replacement remained active. The grid acknowledged at 08:19. No follow-up questions. No inquiry about the non-grid vessel. The system processed my update the way it processed everything, correctly, efficiently, without curiosity. The hours between the Wren's landing's departure and the Sethran Reach's arrival were ordinary. That is worth statting. Lorith went back to the atmospheric sensor array on the upper ridge, because the sensors needed calibrating regardless of what had happened inside the habitat. Toreth monitored Pren and Dorev. Director Kell completed his preliminary notes. I filed the morning log, not log 615, which I had never finished, but a replacement entry that documented the event rather than the routine it had interrupted. I ate lunch in the common room. Grain paste with mineral supplement, the same meal. The recycler hummed. The air was clean. I found myself between tasks, opening the comms console's manual dial register and looking at the frequency I had entered when the Wren's landing first made contact. It was still there, a number outside any of my preset banks, manually keyed, not linked to any identifier in my recognition library. I did not delete it. I did not add it to the preset banks. I left it where it was. At 13:27, the KAV Sethran Reach arrived. It was a large ship, a dedicated maintenance cruiser with a crew of 40, a full atmospheric systems workshop, a cargo hold of replacement parts indexed by model number, and a medical bay staffed by 2 Keithrani physicians. It docked at the exterior maintenance port on the first attempt. The gasket held without issue. A maintenance team of 8 came aboard. They were efficient and thorough. They inspected the recycler bay, examined the temporary gasket Captain Foss's crew had installed, ran a full diagnostic on the primary recycler, and replaced the gasket with a Keithrani manufactured part rated for the correct pressure grade and model designation. They replaced the intake seal housing. They flushed the scrubber medium and loaded a fresh supply. They inspected every interior seal in the habitat and replaced 3 that showed degradation. They examined Pren's, Burns, and Dorev's respiratory irritation and administered Keithrani-specific treatments that Medic Torath approved and monitored. The lead maintenance officer, Senior Technician Kaval As, found me in the comms bay afterward. He was holding a small, dull-colored ring of material, the Terran gasket that his team had removed from the recycler. Model 11 bore seated on a Model 9 housing, he said, turning the gasket in his fingers. The pressure rating is higher than required. The seat is clean. It would have held for months. He set the gasket on my console. Good work. It was not our work, I said. It was installed by the crew of an Earth Patrol frigate that responded to our hail. He looked at me. Your hail was filed to the grid. Yes. The grid dispatched us. Yes. How did an Earth Patrol frigate receive a hail filed to the grid? I told him. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for 5 seconds. Then he said, the relay officer read the telemetry. Yes. And did the arithmetic. Yes. And sent a frigate. Yes. He picked up the gasket again and looked at it. Well, he said, it fit. He put the gasket in his tool belt and left the comms bay. The KAV Sethran Reach departed at 16:50. Director Kell signed the maintenance completion form. I co-signed it. The 40-person crew returned to their ship, the docking seal disengaged, and the maintenance cruiser pulled away from Verith 4 in the same unremarkable way it had arrived, a large, competent vessel completing a standard service call, 12 hours and 9 minutes after the distress hail was filed. 12 hours and 9 minutes. The recycler had been restored for 9 hours and 28 minutes before they arrived. I do not note this as criticism. The Sethran Reach carried proper replacement parts, proper medical staff, proper diagnostic equipment. Everything the Wren's landings crew had done was temporary. The gasket was the wrong model. The bronchodilator was an interspecies analog. The sealant compound on the housing scoring was a field patch. The proper repairs were completed by the proper crew using the proper parts. That is what the system is for. That is what the system does well. But the proper crew arrived 12 hours after the hail was filed, and the air had become survivable again 47 minutes after a relay officer in the adjacent sector decided that 12 hours was too long. That evening, I wrote my incident report. The Keithrani Administrative Grid's incident report form has 47 fields. I filled them all. Station identifier, nature of emergency, timeline of events, atmospheric data, injuries, treatment, grid response, outcome. In the timeline section, I noted every timestamp. 04:11 alarm, 04:14 seal failure, 04:38 distress hail filed, 04:41 grid confirmation, ETA 11 hours 14 minutes. 05:09 signal received from ECV Wren's landing, Earth Terran Patrol Service. 05:56 Wren's landing docked. 07:22 recycler restored. 07:41 Wren's landing departed. 1327 kAV Sethran reach arrived. 1650 kAV Sethran reach departed, all repairs complete. Field 39 asks for the identity of the first responding vessel. I wrote, ECV Ren's Landing, Earth Terran Patrol Service, Patrol Frigate, Captain Ren Foss commanding. Crew complement, 3 observed. Environmental Systems Technician aboard with prior experience servicing Keith Ronnie Model 9 recyclers. Vessel docked at Earth Signal Station Fairfield 11 for scheduled sensor calibration at time of dispatch. Field 40 asks for the responding vessel's dispatching authority. The field expects a grid node identifier, a relay platform, a sector command office, a fleet operations center. The field is 12 characters long and formatted for Keith Ronnie administrative grid designators. I wrote in the margin beside the field because the field itself was too small and the wrong format. Earth Signal Station Fairfield 11. Petty Officer Marin Cade, acting alone. Field 41 asks how the responding vessel received the distress hail. The field offers 4 options: a direct hail, B, grid relay, C, universal emergency band, D, other. I selected D, other. In the explanatory line beneath, I wrote, the distress hail was filed to the Keith Ronnie Administrative Grid Emergency Maintenance Frequency and was not addressed to any Earth facility. Earth Signal Station Fairfield 11 intercepted the hail passively as part of a routine traffic monitoring program. The relay officer on duty was not authorized to read the content of the intercepted communication. She was not authorized to act on it. She was not authorized to dispatch a vessel. She read the atmospheric telemetry, calculated that the station's time to critical was 4 hours and 32 minutes, compared this to the grid's confirmed response ETA of 11 hours and 14 minutes, and dispatched the only vessel available to her. The vessel arrived in 47 minutes. I read the paragraph back. Every sentence was a fact I could verify from my transmission logs, from the environmental panel recordings, from Captain Foss's spoken account, and from the docking port sensor feed. I saved the report. Then I opened it again and added one final note at the bottom of Field 41. I have requested a copy of Petty Officer Cade's relay log for this event from ECV Ren's Landing. It was provided before the vessel's departure. It is attached to this report as Appendix C. The relay log is 3 lines long. Line 1. Maintenance hail intercepted Keith Ronnie 7th Sector, Station KV 70441, atmospheric recycler failure, 6 personnel, 2 injured. Line 2. Telemetry reviewed. Time to critical, 4H32M nearest Keith Ronnie asset ETA, 11H14M Delta, 6H42M assessment, non-survivable without intervention. Line 3. ECV Ren's Landing dispatched. Transit time to station, 47 minutes. There is no 4th line, no justification, no citation of the standing humanitarian response order that Captain Foss mentioned, no explanation of why she read the telemetry she was not authorized to read or why she acted when she was not authorized to act. 3 lines: intercepted, reviewed, dispatched. I filed the report to the grid at 1914. The grid acknowledged at 1917. In the week since I have returned to my routine. I file my daily logs. I am on log number 661 now. I calibrate the relay equipment. I eat grain paste in the common room and read the overnight sensor digest and walk 11 paces to the comms bay and sit in the same chair. The recycler hums. The air is clean. Pren's burns have healed to pale scarring on her forearms, and Dorev's coughing has stopped entirely. Director Kell submitted the station's updated risk assessment to the grid, and the grid approved the new 12-month recycler service schedule without comment. The grid's emergency response office on Keithran Prime reviewed my incident report and classified the non-grid response as anomalous but resolved. They recommended the 12-month service schedule, an increase in emergency oxygen reserves from 4 canisters to 8, and a review of the secondary recycler's rated capacity to determine whether an upgrade was warranted. They noted that the non-grid vessel's intervention, while effective, fell outside the administrative framework of Keith Ronnie emergency response, and therefore could not be incorporated into future contingency planning. They did not mention Petty Officer Cade. I understand the grid's position. The grid is a system. It operates within its parameters. It dispatches assets according to availability and transit time, and it does not account for assets it does not know about, on frequencies it does not monitor, crewed by personnel who are not in its directory. The grid's response to our emergency was correct in every measurable way. It dispatched the nearest vessel. It confirmed the timeline. It processed every update I filed. The fact that the timeline was longer than our survival window was not a failure of the system. It was a fact of distance. I do not fault the grid. The grid did what it does. But I have added a name to a file I maintain separately from the grid's official records. It is a local contact log, a small file stored on my personal console partition, outside the grid's directory structure. It contains one entry: Earth Signals Station Fairfield 11, Relay Officer Petty Officer Marin Cade, monitoring frequency noted. The file has no official purpose. The grid does not require it. The grid does not know it exists. I maintain it anyway. The incident reports field 40 asks for the dispatching authority. The field is 12 characters long. It expects an institution, a grid node, a sector command, a fleet center, a system, a process with 31 fields and 47 fields and 11-hour response times and acknowledgments that arrive in 3 minutes and do everything correctly. The dispatching authority was one person at a signals desk in the adjacent sector who read the numbers and did not wait for authorization. The form does not have a field for acting alone. I wrote it in the margin.